There is this guy from Canada called Brad, and a guy from Yorkshire, he's called Dan. They got together when the battles tried to kill them, and made this podcast to talk about their illness. Brad and Dan are talking shit. Brad and Dan are talking shit. Yes, Brad and Dan are talking shit to you and you and you.
Good day, beautiful people of this floating rock we lovingly call home. It is I, Dan, and as always, I am propped up by the always understated cosmic content creator that is Brad. But what, dear listener, my sweet web surfing audio files, is the purpose in this endless online universe? Well, we are the voice of the voiceless, the champions of the chronically ill. But what are our qualifications in this field, I hear you ask? Well, Brad, aside from having one buttock adorned with the tattoo of Christopher Reeves and the other adorned with Che Guevara, has a PhD in empathy, a master's in sympathy, and a doctorate in positivity. I, Dan, offer little more than the ability to talk shit. Hence the name of the single greatest loosely health-based podcast, Brad and Dan Talk Shit. How you doing, Brad? How's your shit?
I'm doing good, Dan. Thanks. Geez, I got a lot of shit going on right now. It's like a bit overwhelming, to be honest, but we're getting through it. Over the last little bit, we've been doing gender reveal photos. I had a...
Not your gender, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, I had to let everyone know, 40 years in, no one knew.
That would be a slightly different photo shoot, I imagine.
But I had this big thing planned, and then Snow came in and said, nah, you're not going to do it that way. So I made the best of it and ended up doing
Global warming strikes again.
Well, maybe for you guys. Snow's regular for us.
Okay. Fair enough.
We were made a spectacle, though. We shot in the middle of our cul-de-sac at 6:30 in the morning and had neighbors on their balconies recording us and taking pictures. It was rather amusing. I haven't had onlookers like that in a while.
Since your gender reveal party.
And we've been going through names for our daughter. I think we've we're pretty settled on one, but you know how that goes.
The name debate is just horrible. It's endless.
It is.
And congratulations on landing on one. But how many names did you get through?
Surprisingly, like we had a list going, and then when we actually sat down to look, we went through like a handful, and then we both like landed. I think my wife had a variation of names. And then I was like, what if we take that name and this name and then put them together? So like first and middle. And we were both like, that's it. And we've told our parents, and all the parents are like, we like that. So we're on a roll. But as most people know who have kids, you don't know if that, like when you see them born, that might change. Right? Like that might go out the window.
I think it gets difficult. So the first hurdle you have to overcome is people in your past who've been an absolute arsehole to you, who have that name and who have tainted it.
Yeah.
But then the second one is first child, I think, is slightly easier because it's your first child. Then when you get into second, third, fourth, fifth, however many of your litter you're planning on, then you have the issue of, oh, well, I really like that name, but child one is in a class with someone of that name and they're a little shit. So I can't use that name. Or I like that name, but my friend from work has named their daughter that within the last month, so we can't use that name. So yeah, it gets. I think it gets more complex as you get more children. So
I will admit,
child one we settled on within about 2 conversations. By child 3, it took about 47,000 hours to settle on the correct name.
That sounds about right. I know.
And then to be fair, her name now, saying about her being born, what we call her in the household is not actually her given name.
Of course.
It's a derivative of, but it's not. She's just
Right.
not that child. So yeah, it may change as she gets older.
We did have we had boys and girls names before we knew the gender, and I did actually notice that someone took one of the boys' names on my Facebook. I'm like, well, that one's gone.
Yeah. It's this weird thing how you want to be original, but then if you think about it in a wider context, you're not ever going to be original.
No, not completely.
There's 7 billion people on the planet, and there's probably about 120 names. So there's going to be some crossover.
Yeah, a little overlap. Other than that, this will come out just after the original campaign, but it'll still be on sale. I've got my new G for G meets D&D shirt campaign that's been going on. So proud of that. This is my second shirt design. I'm already working on a new shirt. Started yesterday randomly. It was like, oh, I got an idea.
So we should say at this point, for anyone listening on Spotify, you can also catch us on YouTube, where you get to see our beautiful faces.
Yes.
And also Brad's stunning wardrobe. So if you want to look at the t-shirt design, head over to the YouTube channel, which will be linked in the episode description.
That or follow us on Twitter.
Or follow us on Twitter. Yes, that's usually an endless stream of joy.
My last point is, I guess, I've had blood work done a little bit ago. I had it done actually before our last recording, but it's been some heavy testing, so I was only trickling in now. And it's looking like I might have a possible diagnosis of autoimmune liver hepatitis, which,
sounds fabulous.
It's not the greatest, but I've looked at, I had my moment of what the fuck and then moved on to okay, and I contacted my GI and was like, we need to get on this. And now I'm just kind of back to focusing on my wife and daughter. There's nothing else I can do at the moment, so there's no reason to stress. As Stacey will say, a bit of back and forth, we record this after our interview.
How dare you reveal the inner workings of this magical little audio slice of excellence? But no, So I guess today is Stacey, and she did allude to that quite heavily.
Yeah,
that you can only roll with the dice you've been given.
That's it, right? You make a plan and you go from there. But that's my shit. How's your shit, Dan?
I'm okay. Been a little bit. I had some stomach pains today, which I've kind of avoided for a while, so that wasn't particularly pleasant. But I'm okay. I'm fine. Big news for me. So, as this podcast comes out, I will have hopefully completed my 10K run for my local hospice. But as we record, I am within 10 days of the run.
Okay. How's training going?
Well, training last week was terrible because my wife was working away and child 2 was off sick from school. She's had a horrible virus, so I couldn't get out to run at all, because obviously you don't want to leave a child home alone at the best of times, let alone when they're ill. So I went out for a run yesterday and it was fine and dandy. And then, like I say, I've woken up today, we're feeling a little bit ropey. So we'll see how that goes over the next few days. Right. We've also got 4 days of snow.
I've heard.
Coming in today and for the next 4 days. So it may be gym heavy work for the next couple of days until I'm able to run outdoors. But I'm sure it'll be fine. And I've had a couple of nice donations from a couple of listeners, which has been lovely. And then one really lovely thing we had something in our mailbag this week, which was very nice. A lady from the United States got in touch to say how she's been struggling with cancer and a few other chronic illnesses that go along with the cancer, but has said that we are a constant source of sunshine in her life,
Love it.
which absolutely made my week.
I know it
So
did.
much more of that. That was a fabulous message to receive around my
Yeah.
birthday as well. So it was really well timed.
Little bit of a birthday
So,
present.
absolutely. All in all, it's been a good week. So we shall careen headlong into today's guest. So
Right on.
our guest today is a slight departure from what we normally do. Now, Stacey does suffer with some chronic illnesses, which we touch on briefly in the episode. But what we talked about today was Alzheimer's. Now, Alzheimer's is a neurological disease which falls under the category of dementia, and I'm sure everyone who listens will have been touched in some form by dementia at some point.
Right.
The older you get, the more likely you are to have dementia. I think it's reasonably. I think it's 10% of the over 65s have it, and then it increases incrementally. So by the time you're 90, if you don't have some form of dementia, you're doing incredibly well.
Right.
Now, Alzheimer's is a horrible disease, as we'll get into, as it robs it robs the loved ones of the person they love.
Yeah.
But it also robs the person suffering of themselves. But it does it in such a gradual way that I think it's quite a cruel disease. But we'll get into this as we talk to Stacey. But yeah, it is a horrible disease, and I'm really grateful for Stacey to take the time to talk to us today. So without further ado, let's get her on and have a little chat.
All right.
Brad and Dan talk shite.
And welcome to the show, Stacey, who's joining us all the way from sunny Texas. I presume it's sunny there. It's snowing here in not so sunny Yorkshire, and Brad lives in a continued state of darkness up in Canada, the snow Mexican that he is. So, Stacey, how are you?
I am doing great. How are you guys?
My usual miserable self, which is about as good as I get. Brad, you?
Oh, I'm doing good. I'm doing really good.
The captain of positivity there.
Yeah,
So,
what can I say?
Stacey, why don't you give us a little rundown on your experience with today's topic, which is Alzheimer's disease, which is of the umbrella of dementia.
Correct. To begin with, I'm a high school math teacher. But my grandmother was diagnosed probably in about 2006 or 2007 with Alzheimer's. And so I was one of the ones that helped take care of her, in addition to the rest of the family. But yeah, I was close to my grandmother, super close. And so I just really enjoyed getting to take care of her and be there for me after she was there for me so many years.
That's sweet.
Yeah, returning the favor of care as it is. So I'm interested to know. So Alzheimer's is a degenerative brain disease for those who live under a rock and aren't aware. When did you first notice a change in your grandmother? Did you notice something prior to diagnosis? Had it become blaringly obvious to you and your family members that there was a problem, or was it kind of a shock when the diagnosis came?
We started noticing some things right away. She started saying things that were out of character for her. We'll phrase it
Okay.
that way.
Okay.
And just kind of basically like there was no filter. And she would just, and this kind, sweet woman, which she was still sweet, but she just said things and we're like, oh, Mimi, you can't say that. That's not appropriate. And then it also started too, like at night. My grandmother lived two streets away from us growing up
Oh,
and
okay.
lived in the house after my grandfather died. And so my dad would go by and check on her every morning. And when we really started getting worried is when he would come by and she'd have all the knives out on the counter. Like something was
Okay.
frightening her at night. And
Right.
almost every morning the knives would be on the counter. So that's when my dad and my aunt and my uncle decided that it was time to get some kind of evaluation done to see what exactly was happening.
Okay.
So, one of my first jobs in a previous existence as a nurse was working in a care home for dementia patients. And it's interesting that one of the first things you say is saying things out of character. Now, one of the ladies I looked after, who was probably much further down the road than your grandmother was, who I looked after, she had one phrase and one phrase alone, and that would be to get off my knickers, you dirty bastard. Now, I'm sure in a previous life this lady had slightly more vocabulary to it than that, but you saying that really just brought that memory home. Um, so, so yeah, so when these things start happening, and the odd phrases and the the weaponry being rolled
Yeah.
out, I think everyone who has a older relative was probably had a conversation at some point about you not being able to say that. It just kind of comes with
Yep.
the territory of generational changes.
Hmm.
So, in those early stages of her cognitive impairment, did you just put it down to aging? Did you put it down to an age gap thing, or was it really crystal clear that she'd she'd changed and she'd lost a part of herself?
I think kind of it's kind of hard to at the beginning we thought again it was just like you said it was old age, it was
Right.
like I said, the repeating of herself, and the
Yeah,
the saying things out of character. We're like, okay, well, maybe I think it was always in the back of our mind that it could have been that. But I mean, this woman survived an aneurysm. She had an aneurysm in
Wow.
1999, and she was always so strong, and she'd overcome a lot. And so we're like, well, maybe it is. She's getting older. She's in her 70s, 80s, and maybe that's just it. But like I said, we pretty much knew it was not that when the weaponry started coming out at night, and would we were so afraid not that anybody would break in her house, but we were worried for her safety at that point.
Yeah,
yeah,
totally.
So
It wasn't her
and not to
preparing for the next John Wick movie.
exactly.
yeah. So I was going to go down a different line of making sweeping generalizations about the good people of Texas and saying that she hadn't amassed 19 guns.
Oh yeah.
But at least it was just the knives.
Right, and she was always she cooked a lot. Like I said, she
Oh
was
yeah.
in Allen. She was the first food service lady,
Oh,
the first lunch lady. She was the first food service director. So I mean, she was cooking all the time. So having all these knives, that part was not out of character. It was just,
right.
oh my gosh, now they're spread on
What
the counter. We're like,
what what she was planning to do with them was slightly different. Yeah,
exactly. She wasn't like cooking a steak or soup or anything.
yeah, okay. So how quickly did the disease advance? How quickly did it really take a hold of your grandmother?
It really, I will say by 2009, we decided that she was no longer, so we're talking 2 or 3 years, that she was no longer able to live on her own. And
Right.
that's when the siblings, if you will, they got together and decided it was probably time for her to go to assisted living. So
Okay.
about
Okay.
3 years. Like I said, it had gotten to the point. I remember I had brain surgery in 2009 because my grandmother and I do share a genetic condition called essential tremors.
Right.
And
Okay.
so I had brain surgery, and I do remember my dad, of course, by that point, that by 2009, they'd taken away her keys. She couldn't drive anymore. She was kind of dependent on us to take her places. Um, and I remember one day, I'm in recovery, so I'm not able to go back to work, but I'm still able to go and do like little trips. And
Right.
I took her out to lunch, and it had writing on the window. And she's looking at that window, like pointing at it. And I'm like, well, everything okay? And she's like, that says, and she couldn't read anymore.
Wow.
Okay.
And so that kind of, I called my dad. I was a little bit upset. I said, Dad, she can't read anymore. You know, And I said, I'm worried she's kind of not, she knows me because I come and get her all the time,
Right.
but she maybe doesn't realize that I'm her granddaughter at that point.
There's some distance in the eyes when
Hmm.
she's like interacting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, and she'd say, girl or boy, because she couldn't remember names and stuff like that. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
that was about, so probably April of 2009 is when we decided she needed to go at least into, I don't want to call it minimum security because it's not jail, but kind of the lowest. We're
There,
locking her
there,
up.
there is an aspect to that, though. Let's be honest. It is
Right.
when you get put in one of those homes, there is a certain amount of security, and it is for the benefit of the patient.
Exactly.
If you don't know where you are or who you are, and you're wandering around, um, so I could regale you with numerous stories from my experience of working there, but it's probably for later on in the podcast. So one of the questions that just sprung to mind from you saying that, now, was there a period of your grandmother's disease where she was still aware enough in herself that something had changed?
Um,
So,
I'm
so,
gonna
so she's forgetting things and she's aware she's forgetting things.
right, kind of probably I would say right at the beginning,
Okay.
because I would say probably by this was 2006, 2007, and by, 2008, she kind of was, I think it was, it's really hard to say, like, it's kind of like it happened. She knew she had Alzheimer's in the beginning, but I think the decline where she realized that something was wrong kind of she faded into it. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does. Yeah, it's
And I was
go
just
on,
gonna
go ahead.
say, we had like a brief little chat this morning, aside because I was trying to get a little bit of extra info. Was this a surprise coming on? Because you mentioned that you don't think further down the line that it was a diagnosed problem. Did you like when you're thinking about what's going on, did it make you try to think back about if this was like in prior generations?
It did, and I will say, like I said, her father passed away when she was 18 years old. There was a
Oh
fire, and
wow.
he was burned pretty bad in the fire. Um, but I will say, the essential tremors that both she and I share came from her father's side.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
looking back at the family history, um, we know that came down through the genes. So part of me, I'm not gonna lie, doesn't want, I don't want to be like not concerned, but I don't want to like sound the
Mhm.
alarms. I always worry, is that gene gonna come to me? Because I
Yeah.
she and I got diagnosed with the essential tremors at the same time, but I was
Right.
13 years old.
Right.
So
Okay.
so I always wondered, well, because we have such a strong genetic connection there neurologically, is that going to come down the line? And you know, I don't. Even if I were to get tested, it's not going to change the outcome. Whatever's going to happen
Exactly.
is going to happen. Um, but I will say her mom had that I'm aware of. My great grandmother passed away when I was really little. That I don't think there was any sign of dementia there. I mean, she would have kept going as long as
Right.
she could have.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, so part of the disease is the older you get, the more likely you are to get the disease. So my grandmother, I think she got to 93, 94. But by the time she was 93, 94, she was not there anymore. I
Right.
remember introducing my now wife to my grandmother, and she thought I was my grandfather, not the grandfather she married, my paternal grandfather. It was my
Right.
maternal grandmother who had Alzheimer's at that point, but she
Right.
knew him as a child. So
Right.
she was convinced I was my grandfather, who is now 86. So
Okay.
there's a slight age discrepancy between the two of us, considering I was 21 at the
Mm.
time. But that's just the nature of the disease,
Yeah.
isn't it? It just and
Correct.
it seems to focus on specific memories. So people will make no sense, but then they'll fixate on one point in time, which makes perfect sense to them a
Yeah.
little bit.
Well, and I remember too with her, I had taken her out on an errand one day, and we were just sitting there, and just out of the blue, she started talking about my grandfather, but not
Mm,
my grandfather who had passed away. The older gentleman. She started talking about him like it was when they first met or when they were first together as married couple and all that stuff. So, because we're just sitting kind of overlooking like a field area, and she's like, "Yeah, started talking about granddad like he was 20 years old or something."
yeah, yeah,
And so I let her go. I engaged in the conversation, and because she was having not so much a lucid moment, but she could remember my grandfather like as far until she just got really bad, where she
Right.
stopped talking.
yeah,
So
yeah. It's a very strange disease in that instance because even as the disease advances, and this is purely my experience, this isn't data driven, but people will still cling on to memories from a specific time. So I looked after one gentleman who fought in the Second World War, and pretty much every other day he would be convinced that his walking stick was a machine gun and
Wow.
he was defending whatever camp it was in the Second World War from the Jerrys. And, you'd find him like hiding behind desks or hiding behind seats because he was convinced that the nursing staff in their uniforms were clearly, the Germans, the Jerrys, and they were out to get him. But then on other days he'd be quite in the moment and quite compos mentis. It's quite a taxing disease, I imagine, for someone for a relative, for someone close to that
Yeah.
person to go through, because you can have those moments of clarity where you think, hang on, they're okay again, they've recovered, and then
right.
you have the next day where it's no, they haven't.
Well, that kind of
So
makes me wonder regarding around, like, I would call that core memories, like the core memories that we tend to hold on to and build that are specific points in our lives. Was there anything, at least during the early stages for your grandmother, that would help bring memories on, like a smell or a taste or just something that would trigger?
So studies have shown, just to jump in, that studies have shown, or some studies have shown, that music is actually quite a big trigger for memories.
And again, I bet you that
Sorry,
relates back
carry on.
to core memory, right?
Yeah,
Music
yeah.
attributed to moments in time.
Well, I can still remember every lyric to albums I bought when I was 14, but if I listen to a song from 2 weeks ago, I can't remember a damn thing about it,
Yeah.
which probably suggests that I'm careering straight towards a Alzheimer's diagnosis. But sorry, carry on. I digress, as I often do.
I would say not so much. Hers was not necessarily music, but like I would intentionally talk to her about things that had happened in the past, because hers was more that I witnessed. It was more the long term she could still hold
Yeah,
on to in the beginning. The short term, she had trouble with. And I remember one time she was in the hospital because she'd injured her arm, and this was kind of more towards the later stages.
Okay.
But my husband and I walked in because I was going to spend the night. We always made sure whenever she was in the hospital that somebody was there with her through the night, so that if she woke up, she may not know who we are, but she might remember that somebody's here, taking care of her. So I always, being the youngest one, got the night shift. Um, but my husband, they're like, "Hey, let's see, she's in her 20s, go for it." Um, but like I remember walking in one night, my husband and I, and she's like, "You need to get your lawnmower and just go home." I go, and didn't bring my lawnmower. What? A- And then the best part was she continued on. She goes, "I've got to go. I've got to go to Dallas." I'm like, "Mimi, we can't go to Dallas." She's like, "No, I'm going to take the train." There used to be a train, like we're talking in the 20s, the 30s,
Okay.
whatever, that would drive like suburbs from Dallas, and it would take them into Dallas. She goes, "I'm going to ride the train and I'm going to go meet a man." And I go,
brilliant.
Mimi, she goes, I go, does granddad know about this? No, he doesn't. You're not going to tell him. And I'm like, okay.
Fantastic.
Oh,
So
So,
I remember,
sorry,
oh, go ahead.
carry on,
amazing.
Stacey.
I was just gonna say, I called my dad. I was like, Dad, Meme thinks she's gonna meet some strange man in Dallas. Should we, be concerned and stuff? But I mean, you take it with a grain of salt. You had to laugh at it
Yeah,
because if you didn't,
Yeah, yeah,
you'd be
yeah.
in tears the whole time.
I think the
100%.
trouble is that the risk there is that you take it too seriously, but given what we know about the disease is that you can't really take anything too seriously. Even those memories can get quite jumbled up, I
Oh, yeah.
imagine.
Oh yeah.
So again, harking back to my nursing career, there is a thing that we used to lovingly call night timing, which is when you had a bunch of patients over the age of 80 and turned off the lights on a night time, a good 25% would go batshit crazy.
Hmm.
You know, even people without diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia, they would, go absolutely off the wall, trying to climb into different beds, demanding to be let off the ward, and we're not allowed to incarcerate them illegally. And these would be high functioning people, who ex-barristers, ex-doctors. But if you turn that light switch off, they went absolutely loco on a night time, and it was always
Yeah.
hilarious slash frustrating by 3 o'clock in the morning. But I've always had a theory that, especially of that generation, where you would live in the same house for 50, 60, 65 years, and then suddenly you're in a hospital bed, surrounded by strangers, and the lights go off, and there's all this beeping, and there's these people who are just marching up and down, demanding to take your blood pressure or your bloods, or
Yeah, every few
check how much
hours.
urine output there is. It must be absolutely mind-blowing, especially if you're slightly ill and you're tired and you're waking up and all this craziness is going off around you. But yeah, that's
I
not
know.
uncommon for people to get slightly army in hospital. I mean, Brad's got numerous cases of getting his penis out on the wards, but that's a different story.
Well, not a tribute to that, but I was going to say I've definitely
And
experienced
that was
that
usually
offhand.
like midday.
Yeah. But I've
This is
heard
your
some
midday
of
salute.
some folks freaking out in the middle of the night when I was in hospital, basically being like,
Yeah.
"Get the F off me! Who the F are you?"
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Like,
One
And
of my favorites. One of my favorites was a friend of mine who I was nursing with, and he went to see this. Went to do a lady's blood pressure who just had a heart attack a few hours earlier. So we do regular blood pressures, as you can imagine. But she'd fallen into a deep sleep. And he's a lovely guy. He's a very good nurse, but he's a big guy. He's probably twice as wide as me and big and bearded. And so he walked up to this lady, and she. The next thing we heard was her shout, "Murder!" And she was convinced that he was there to murder her. And it took about 25 minutes for us to calm her down. And
that's amusing.
still to this day, whenever my friend comes round to the house, my wife shouts murder at him just to relive that moment.
I like it.
I feel we got slightly off track here. So to get back to the seriousness. So from first inkling that there was something wrong, through to the end game, not to put it too bluntly, through to when your grandmother died. How long was that?
probably I would say got diagnosed 2006, 2007, about 5 years.
So about
Okay.
5 years. Okay. And yeah, I mean, so this I think this brings Brad onto a question that he wanted to ask further down the line. I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but so Brad, do you want to ask about the impact on
Oh, yeah.
relationships?
So how did the disease impact you and your relationship with your grandmother over time? Let's say from the start to, as Dan's eloquently put it, the end.
I think I will admit it was hard watching her go downhill. I think that's probably a common reaction.
Hmm.
But my goal was I wanted to spend as much time with her as I could
Yes.
before kind of the curtains finally went down. Like I said, I'm a teacher, so I'd have summers off or, after summer school or whatever.
Right.
And it would be spent with her. And I would go to her house and, we'd go run errands or something just to get her out of the house. I do remember when we did move her because she moved to a complete lockdown Alzheimer's. The good thing about her
Okay.
assisted living place was it resembled a house. It very much was a house
Yeah.
with, nurses and whatever and caretakers and everything. So probably, I want to say maybe 2010, 2011, they moved her to the lockdown house, which anytime the door opened, an alarm sounded.
Uh,
And
Yeah.
yeah, and so she did. I would go, and my dad would call me, "Hey, Memes had a bad day. Stop by and see her. Stop by and say hi to her, whatever." So I was always famous for going over there, and I had a little bag, and I'd trim her nails, and I'd
mhm.
paint her nails in her favorite color. Then I'd do her toes because in the lockdown facility, she couldn't go get those things that she had done before.
Right.
So I would come and do that, and pretty much when we'd moved her to the lockdown facility, I think she remembered my face, but she didn't remember that I was her granddaughter.
Right.
And one of my favorite stories is that she figured out it had a push bar on the door, on
Okay.
the front door, and so she figured out that if you push the little thing on the side of the door that latches, that she thought she could break out. And so I remember she goes, "Come here." And she goes, I'm going to show you how I can get out. And she pushed,
Hmm.
she didn't realize the alarm actually sounded when the door opened. But I was like, "Mimi, you can't escape. You can't do that." But, but like I said, I was just, I think, like I said, my goal was I wanted to spend as much time as I could with her laughing
Yes.
and, having a good time because I wanted those memories because those memories were going to have to carry me once she was gone.
Right. Well, it sounds like you were a
It's
So,
bright
very
spot during all that time. So that's really beautiful.
well, and I will say too, her assisted living, of course, like I said, it was a lockdown Alzheimer's unit. But I mean, the residents in the house you just grew close to as well. Because I'd
Yeah.
be
yeah.
sitting there, and I think I told you guys in one email. There's one lady, she'd always come, she goes, "Did you get your pup tent? Did you bring your pup tent?" I'm like, "I'm not an outdoors girl. What is a pup tent?" And so, like, "It's a pop tent." I was like, "Oh, got it." But you grew close to these people because you saw them 2 and 3
Mm.
times a week, and you conversed with
Yeah.
them, and and then when one of them passed, it was especially hard because I'd grown connected not just to my grandmother but to all these people, and so it was hard
I,
to watch them go as well. So
I
Yeah,
guess
that's
when they
understandable.
go as well, though, it's kind of an indication of what's to come. It's
it
kind of a
was.
reminder of, that it's all fun and games trying to sneak out of this high security prison with my gran, but one
Right.
day this ain't gonna be all shits and giggles anymore.
Exactly. And she'll, towards the end, she was pretty much staying in bed and not coming out to the general commons room. And,
Yeah.
she was sleeping a lot. So,
Yeah, and that's part of the disease that I don't think a lot of people who haven't dealt with it are aware of. That you can get to a point where you are bedbound with
Yeah.
Alzheimer's,
hmm
um, and it becomes almost a case of like a locked-in type of disease, which is
Right.
really when it gets quite difficult, I think. And I'm only speaking of this from experience of looking after patients with this like end stage of the disease where they are bedbound, and there were a couple of people I looked after who were like this for a couple of years.
right.
Um,
And it must be
so
hard
yeah,
on the families, especially at that state.
yeah, and I
Right.
think it's difficult for families when you get to that state to keep. And this sounds incredibly callous, but when you're getting nothing back at all, there's nothing left of the person that you love. It's literally a shell. I think, and this is purely conjecture on my part, it must be so physically tiring to keep
Yeah.
going in. Like you were saying, you were going in and seeing your gran 3 times a week when she was still, you know, trying to rob the
Yeah.
Louvre and trying to escape from a maximum security prison. But when you get to the point where you're getting nothing back, there's no conversation, there's no indication of affection. It's just a shell that's left.
Right.
That as a relative must be absolutely soul destroying, and you're going to be absolutely kiboshed by guilt that you don't really want to be there to see that anymore.
Yeah.
And almost a longing for it to come to a nice end for your relative. So
Well,
yeah,
and I won't lie, towards the end, I was just like, I remember, even though she's asleep, I'd sit in the room with her and kind of, just pat her hand or, pat her head or whatever. And I remember towards the end, it was like a few days before she passed away. And I remember telling her, Mimi, it's okay to go.
Right.
yeah,
Um, it's
yeah.
okay to go see granddad,
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
It's fine.
So,
It's
Tough
absolutely fine.
subject.
But yeah, so I remember saying that. I was like, you know what? When you go, Granddad's gonna be there, your mom's gonna be there, um, all of
The
the
guys
Curtis
from
family.
Dallas are going to be there.
Yeah, some guy she's gonna go see from Dallas is gonna be there. And so, but yeah, I remember telling her that, and then I remember getting the call a few days later. Ironically, like I said, as a teacher, we started back to school like beginning of August, and I remember getting the call the day before I was supposed to start back to school, and my dad said, "Hey, we just got the call. She passed away in her sleep." And you know, you hate to say it, but it was almost a relief because
Yeah.
I didn't want her to be in pain. I didn't want her to be suffering, not knowing who she was.
That's it.
Perfectly reasonable response.
Yep.
I
So,
think, and I'd struggle to believe anyone who doesn't feel a sense of relief in that moment, and I think that's the same with any chronic terminal illness.
Hmm.
When you get to that point where there's no going back, and
correct.
there's no interaction, you're just waiting for them to go. It's perfectly reasonable to see it as a relief.
Hmm.
I think, and this is probably not the time or place for me to wield my theories on life, but I think in Western society we don't have a particularly healthy view of death.
Hmm.
So we should feel guilty that we feel relieved that someone's died.
Right.
Whereas at that point, it's what kind of life are they leading? And
Exactly.
the answer, they're not leading a life. It's like I said, that they've become a shell. They're asleep. They're not. It's essentially it's a body of memories that's laying there,
Hmm.
and it's often the memories that we're projecting onto that body rather than the person themselves. So feeling relief in that moment is perfectly natural and probably quite healthy. And like I said, I'm not sure I would trust someone who doesn't have a sense of relief. Whether they want to admit to it or not is a different story. But I think everyone in that circumstance feels relief, and I think it's entirely natural and reasonable and part of the grieving process. Because I think, again, with these kind of illnesses, you start the grieving process long before they die.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's true.
Because the person you love has gone already. And it's
Exactly.
also a little bit more tortuous because they're going little bit by little bit.
Right.
So the grieving process becomes even more prolonged. Um, so I'm not entirely sure how I bring that round to a comedic ending, which is kind of why I'm here. So let's just move swiftly on and ignore the depths of our sorrow. And Brad, if you can bring us back round to a coherent point, that would be perfect timing.
So, again, we had a bit of a small conversation about this as I was doing my research. I just wanted to touch base. There are different types of Alzheimer's based from early to late onset. In my reading, I saw that early onset includes sporadic, inherited, or familial Alzheimer's.
Hmm.
Do you know what form your grandmother was diagnosed with?
I would say probably she was more late stage because she was in her 70s,
Okay.
I want to say, when she
Okay.
got
Yeah.
diagnosed.
Yeah.
And have you been like, obviously this has been a thing on your mind, and you've mentioned how you, either way, if you find out or don't find out, you're going to go about your life the same way, which I think is the right thing to do, not to get overwhelmed by something that may just happen anyways. Live your life to the best, right? Make those
Hmm.
memories. Um, has has your mother or father had been have they been tested at all?
They have not been tested, and I will say they're not necessarily open to the idea of being tested because my mom's mom also had dementia, possibly Alzheimer's, but
Okay.
she was kind of the more dementia side. But I was like, have y'all thought about getting tested to see if you carry the gene? And my dad's like, nope, not gonna do it, blah blah blah. And I was like, well, what about me? Because she and I share that
Hmm.
close genetic connection of the essential tremors.
Right.
Um, and he's like, well, you know, I wouldn't say get tested. He said, because you're just going to worry about, and he's right. Probably with my personality, I'd worry about, oh my gosh, I forgot my keys, or oh my gosh, I forgot
Right.
this at school, or whatever.
The little
Um,
things.
right. And, also too, when you have Crohn's, y'all know you have the brain fog. Like
Yeah.
there are some days I can't even remember what I wore yesterday.
I think
And
I think being over the age of 30, you have the brain fog as well.
exactly. It's just that,
I
oh,
just
I'm getting
think
old. Uh, so I do worry about that, but then most of my stuff I just lay off to brain fog, or my husband will go, "I told you that 2 weeks ago." I'm like, "Are you sure?" You know?
when your husband says it's just because I wasn't listening to you.
Yeah, well,
Yes, I
exactly.
was
So
practicing selective
I don't,
hearing.
I don't care what you have to say. Have you not learned this?
Yep.
Yes,
Um, I
and
mean, it's
I would say the positive side of getting tested is if I did find out that I carried the gene, it would allow me to prep for, I guess, that end of life stage, so that my husband knows what my wishes are should
Yeah,
this happen. Um, and he and I've talked about it before. He's like, Stace, with the Crohn's and all this stuff, he goes, shouldn't we be having those conversations already? I was like, Yeah. But then, I mean, the downside, if I find out, I mean, it's not going to change anything.
that's it.
so
Yeah.
just to so we have to timestamp this. So this podcast is being recorded before our next podcast is released.
Okay.
So one of the interesting conversations we had with our next guest, who is released prior to this podcast coming out, has a terminal illness. And one of the things that really struck me about the conversation we had with him is that we should probably be having those conversations anyway.
Yeah.
We should be probably talking to our partners about what we want when we're gone.
Right.
And it's a completely valid point because you don't know what tomorrow brings.
Yeah.
Hmm.
You know, I could be stabbed by a 76-year-old dementia sufferer tomorrow with her 17 knives.
Yeah.
There's no guarantees. So it's important that we have these conversations regardless.
Oh,
And I
totally.
think anyone, especially anyone living with a chronic illness, because you don't know what tomorrow brings. You don't know what hurdles are going to be thrown at you. So I completely agree that those conversations should be had, but I think personally they should be had anyway.
Yeah.
And harking back to what I said earlier,
Mhm.
we have a really bizarre idea of death in the West. It's going to happen. We're
Right.
all going to die. No one's living forever. So we should be open and honest about saying that, I want a mural of me with the fingers up at all the guests at my funeral. That's what I want. That's how
Yes.
I'm going to go.
I
With
I feel
some
like we're getting
horrendously
better at
ironic
it,
music.
because like I feel like our parents' generation, as Stacey was saying, is just very like, I don't want to know. I don't care. Leave me alone.
Fingers, the,
Like,
the mature approach of fingers in the ears
yeah,
and going la 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 la.
exactly. And I
Yeah.
find at least our generation is getting better at it. And I think like the next generation after will get better at it, at seeing the signs and
Yeah.
making appropriate
Yeah.
steps.
Yeah, I think we're just better at talking in general.
Yes.
The fact that we're making a podcast literally titled "Talking Shit" kind of highlights that no end. So one of the other things you mentioned there, Stacey, was about getting tested. And I wonder if part of that mindset is that as we stand with Alzheimer's at the moment, there are drugs that can make things better, but there's no cure out there. So if there was a cure out there, would you then get tested?
I think I probably would.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
Just
I would as well. As I
yeah.
said it, I thought it was a stupid question, to be honest.
No.
Um,
Well, and I will tell you too, like I said, as far as the essential tremor sites, by the time I was 32, I could not write. I couldn't talk. I couldn't because I had a stutter
Hmm.
with the essential tremors, and it just really, I was about to have to quit working. And my neurologist said, "Hey, I'm going to send you to UT Southwestern. They're doing this amazing procedure." And at that time, not a lot of people were having the deep brain stimulation for
yeah,
the essential tremors.
Right.
And I
which is a
went into it, yeah, I went into it heads.
fantastic procedure. Yeah,
Oh my gosh, it is like looking at me now, you can't tell that I even have it. Now,
No.
if I turn my simulators off, I'd be a hot
yeah,
mess again.
yeah.
But yeah, kind of, tying that together, if there is something that can keep me from getting it, I am all for it. I'm all for it because I don't, not that it's a burden to family. I don't want to say that,
No.
but I don't want to put that suffering on my family if I can prevent it.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's like back to the generational divide of I see a problem, there's a solution, I'm going to attempt said solution, where my father sees a problem, says fuck that, I'm gonna die.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
it's just like I don't care. I'm living my life the way it is. Like I'll just die sooner. It's just like, really?
It's like, but you
Dude.
have so much life to live. You can do this.
Yeah. So it's I really think there's a generational divide there, and going forward we can keep improving upon that. And I honestly I want to know more. This is a different topic, but I want to know more about the essential tremors, the surgery you had, and what you were just mentioning. You said there's some
Deep
device or
brain
something.
stimulation.
Yeah, what's that?
I actually, for the deep brain simulation, I have two electrodes that are implanted into the thalamus of my brain, which is the movement center of your brain.
Okay.
And then the two electrodes have a cord that travels down the right side through my neck. And I have two, like, they look like cardiac pacemakers, but they're neuro pacemakers. And they send a signal to the brain that jams the tremor.
Yeah, so it is
Science.
exactly the same technology as a cardiac pacemaker.
Oh,
Mhm.
It
really?
just sends an electrical signal that interrupts the pre-existing electrical signal, is my understanding. But it is, yeah, it's a fascinating. So people with Parkinson's often get these devices, and I've seen people on stage who will have no tremor, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, Stacey. Will
Right.
have no tremor, and then just to prove how vital a piece of kit it is, they'll then turn it off, and the tremor instantly returns. And
Hmm.
they'll hand the person a glass of water, and the glass of water will be shaking all over, and then they click the device back on, and then it'll just
Oh, yeah.
stop.
Medical
And it's
science is
like,
insane.
So
and like
yeah,
for Parkinson's patients, instead of stimulating the thalamus, they'll stimulate the subnucleic thalamus.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it's
So,
different parts of the brain that you're putting the pacing leads into. Yeah,
mhm.
it's
But yeah,
fascinating.
my mom calls it my circus trick because every year I turn it off for my students just because they're like, we want to
Yeah,
see what you're like. So I turn it off and I show them, like, we can't read that. I'm like, aren't you glad I have this device now?
yeah.
And but yeah, I mean, total. There are some downsides right now. I have the old 2009 tech, so I can't do MRIs or metal detectors.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, so when I go to the airport, I get the pat down. So, um, but yeah, I mean, those are the downsides, and those are so small and minute that having the device.
Yeah.
And here's the fun part: I was completely wide awake for the first surgery.
Oh my.
Yeah,
No.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
No.
random fact here. I once interviewed for a job working in deep brain stimulation,
Oh
and I
wow.
went and saw
That's
3 of those surgeries. So yeah, that's how I was a little bit prepared for that one.
Oh yeah,
Throw any other surgeries at me, and I'll have no idea. But yeah,
Medical
yeah. Like I
science,
said,
man.
that one.
it
So
was it was awesome.
I think we've slightly got off topic,
Sorry,
and I think
No
my bad.
way.
oh, that's fine. We often do. That's kind of the vibe to the show. I think we we probably need to wrap things up here now. So, Brad, if you want to wrap us up with the final question.
So, quite often we like to end the podcast with a like looking back on younger selves, but we'll treat this one a little bit different. What's something you'd like to tell people who have Alzheimer's in their family tree? Some inspiration for them.
I would just say, make the most of the time you have with them. Enjoy every minute you have. Learn to laugh at some of the things and not take them so seriously.
Yes.
Um, and like I said, just because one day that veil's gonna come down
Right.
and you're gonna be talking to a stranger. But just like I said, make the most of the time you have with them. I know I put a lot of stuff on the back burner just to be with my grandmother and enjoy that time. And, because you don't want to look back and go, I shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Yeah.
Because I was able to look back even now and I'm like, I had that time with her. I made those memories. Those will always be with me and they're not going anywhere.
Totally. 100%.
That's a fabulous way to end.
It's a theme. It's a theme, man.
It is
Make
a
those
theme,
memories.
but I'd like to quote the motion picture Spinal Tap as we end, and have a good time all the time.
Hey, yeah.
Stacey, thank you very much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank
maybe we'll
you for
talk
having
soon
me.
about your deep brain stimulation in further depth.
Oh my gosh, I would love to do that because I do
I would.
presentations for Medtronics. I mean, so I would love to have that conversation.
Okay. We'll have to have you back.
Take care. Thank you for
Thank you
joining
so
us.
much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank
Next
you.
time.
Brad and Dan talk shite.
Massive thank you to Stacey for that chat.
Yes, thank you.
Thoughts, feelings, vibes, Brad?
As we seem to be hitting a regular point, we need to look at creating those memories and bonds with our loved ones, as we just don't know what's going to happen down the line, whether or not there's a condition within the family or a random medical emergency that just pops up. It's key to make memories and take time with your loved ones. Like, I can't even stress this enough. I'm going through like similar things with my father, and it's something I'm trying to do at the same time, is be there as a son, be there for him, just be around while I can. And it's crucial, right? Like, you don't want to go back after something happens and look over the time that's gone by to realize that you didn't spend enough time making those memories.
Yeah, but I think that's a wider life lesson as well.
100%.
To try and
Slow
make those
down, make memories.
Yeah, not worry about the stuff that's not going to really matter on your deathbed, and just take the time to appreciate. Take the time to smell the flowers and smell the coffee and smell whatever else people use in overused cliches.
One thing,
but the point remains the same.
One thing I always like to say, and this is true with chronic illness to a huge degree, is you need to look at, like, take solace in the little things. Enjoy the small things. Stop looking big picture.
Stop talking about your penis, Brad. I swear it's every episode. Again, this is just me trying and failing to be funny. You're absolutely right. You've got to take each day as it comes, and I think it's healthy to an extent. Obviously, we all want to have a bigger picture and a plan, but that should never be at the behest of what's happening right in front of you.
Right.
And try and find some positives from every day. What I found, so one of my positives from today is how emotionally open and honest Stacey was in that interview.
Yeah.
Now, Alzheimer's is a horrible disease, and it's not only a horrible disease for those people suffering it. In fact, I think it's probably worse for the people who are caring for the person who's suffering from
100%.
it. Because I think your awareness while you're going through the disease becomes diminished by each passing day, I guess. Maybe not every day, but over time it diminishes. Your self-awareness diminishes, but those around you become increasingly aware of the person they're losing with each passing moment.
Yeah.
And Stacey, I thought, really...
She had
really
a perfect attitude about it.
Open and honest about it. Yeah. It was really refreshing to see, and a really positive message for people going through that, of which there will be many.
Yep.
So yeah, that was really nice to see, and a really positive end to the podcast was end to the important part of the podcast, other than two middle-aged blokes rambling about shit. The have a good time all the time message. Make your memories.
Yeah,
it's a perfect raison d'etre. So why don't we wrap up with that? All right. In the knowledge, and dear listeners, you can get in touch with us at BD Talking. Oh, Brad, you're gonna have to tell me the web address. I'm broken.
Okay,
I'm gonna blame it on the time difference, as I always do.
I'll cut this in. It's
slightly later here.
Our email is, oh my gosh, it is bdtalkingpod@gmail.com, and our Twitter is bdtalkingpod.
There you go. If you want to get in touch, if you've got anything you want to share with us, whether it be abusive messages or your story in Chronic Illness, feel free to get in touch. Until next time, I'm Dan and he's Brad, and you are fabulous. Goodbye.
Have a good one.
There is this guy from Canada called Brad, and a guy from Yorkshire, he's called Dan. They got together when the Bowels tried to kill them, and made this podcast to talk about their illness. Brad and Dan are talking shit. Brad and Dan are talking shit. Yes, Brad and Dan are talking shit to you and you and you.